3 men broke into a locked compound in the middle of the night. They tied up a family, took gold and cash worth a small fortune, and walked out. When police arrived, every gate was still locked from the outside. No fingerprints, no marks on the wire, no witnesses. It took investigators weeks to understand how they got in. The answer, when it came, destroyed a family in a way the robbery never could. He was not the kind of man who left things to chance. In a quiet residential neighborhood of a northern Moroccan city, there was a house that stood out, not because it was loud, but because of how deliberately it was protected. High walls surrounded the property, topped with iron railings, and above those railings, coils of barbed wire ran the full perimeter. The gate was heavy metal, sealed with 2 separate locks. A second reinforced gate controlled vehicle access. Everything about this place said, "I know what I have, and I know what people do to get it." The man who built those walls had earned the right to be cautious. He was 57 years old, married, with 2 children. His wife, a composed woman in her early 50s, had been by his side through decades of hard work. His son, 25, had already left the family home. His daughter, 20, still lived with them. He was a jeweler, not a small one. He owned 2 large gold shops in the city's main commercial market, one of those covered trading halls where dozens of merchants sell precious metals, gems, and custom pieces. He had built real wealth, inventory, cash reserves, business assets. He paid his taxes. He employed 2 young men at his shops. He was known in the neighborhood as generous, approachable, the kind of person neighbors came to when they needed quiet advice or a fair deal. Women from the area would come to his home, not the shops. When they wanted to sell gold they no longer needed, his wife received them. The pieces were weighed, and a fair price was paid on the spot. No middleman, no trip to the market, no risk of being lowballed or robbed on the way home. It was the kind of arrangement that only works when both sides trust each other. And in this neighborhood, they did. He had 3 close friends, all from the same world, men who had built similar lives through gold and trade. They rotated visits, gathering at one another's homes, over tea, talking about money, the future, their children, comfortable men with too much to lose. He also had 2 employees, Hassan and Mohammed, who worked the shops. Good workers. No incidents, no conflicts, no complaints. His son was a different story. The father was a disciplined man, and he raised his son the way men of his generation understood discipline. You earn it yourself. When the son was old enough, the father told him plainly, "While I am alive, I will not hand you this business. Go build something. When I am gone, what I leave will be yours." The son did not argue. He left Morocco, arranged his papers, and went to Spain to find work. He had been there since the previous summer and had not returned. His daughter stayed. She was quiet, kept to herself, had good relationships with the neighbors. Everything about this household suggested order, restraint, control. But there was one crack in the wall. The man's hearing had been deteriorating for months. A burning sensation in both ears, persistent, sometimes unbearable through the night. He had been putting off the doctor. He could still follow a conversation if people spoke clearly, but sounds at the edge of his range had begun to disappear. He did not think it would matter. He was wrong. It was winter, the 2nd month of the year, the cold still heavy in the air. Just past 2 in the morning, the house was silent. His wife woke first. She did not hear a crash. She did not hear shouting. What she heard was something smaller than that. A faint, careful sound. The sound of something being worked at slowly, deliberately. The outer gate, the one in the high-walled perimeter, was being opened. Not forced, not kicked in. Open, quietly, with time and patience. She lay still for a moment, listening. The sound continued. She reached for her husband. He was already half awake, but when she spoke to him, he couldn't make out what she was saying. The burning in his ears had taken the edge off his hearing again. He caught fragments, enough to understand that something was wrong, but not enough to act in time. 3 men came into the house. They knew the layout. They moved directly toward the bedroom, which meant they were not exploring. They had been told where to go. The daughter's room was on the way, and when she heard something and stepped out, one of the men was already there. He grabbed her, threw her to the ground, and pinned her. Within minutes, all 3 family members were face down on the floor, their hands bound behind their backs, wrists tied with gloves still on the men's hands, leaving no fingerprints on the rope. Their faces were pressed toward the wall. One man stood over them, a long knife visible in his hand, and said nothing. The other 2 moved into the bedroom. They did not ransack the house. They went to what they came for: cash, gold, everything the jeweler kept at home, a reserve that any serious trader in his position would maintain. They gathered it, packed it, and left. The gate was locked behind them with the same key they had used to enter. The family lay on the floor, struggling with their restraints, until they worked themselves free. The wife drove them to the police station. When investigators arrived at the house and examined the outer gate, they found it locked from the outside, both locks secured. The inner gate to the garage was also locked. The barbed wire along the top of the walls showed no signs of anyone having climbed over it. No torn clothing, no blood, no scratch marks on the stone. 3 people had entered this property and vanished back out of it without leaving a single trace. The question that would drive the entire investigation was not who took the gold, it was who had the key. The Criminal Investigation Unit arrived and began working the scene methodically. This was a calm city. Robberies did happen, but not like this. Not 3 men, not at 2 a.m, not inside a locked compound, not with this level of planning. The detective assigned to the case was experienced, and he knew immediately that this was not a random break-in. This was targeted. This was organized. And someone who knew this family had made it possible. The perimeter wall was examined from the inside and the outside. Investigators climbed ladders to check the full length of the barbed wire. Nothing. No clothing fibers, no blood, no sign of passage. The gate itself showed 3 small indentations along its frame, top, middle, and bottom, consistent with heavy-duty wire cutters or bolt cutters having been used to force the latching mechanism, quietly, 1 press at a time. That explained how the gate had opened without loud noise. But the gate was then relocked from outside, which meant the men had a key to do so, a key that worked both locks. Detectives sat privately with the jeweler and asked him directly, "Who has a key to this property?" He said no one. They pressed him. "Someone walked out of here and locked 2 locks behind them. That key exists." "Who has it?" He repeated, "No one outside this family has ever held a copy of my key." They believed him, which meant someone had gotten access to the key without him knowing. They moved to the next question. Who knew what was kept in that bedroom? The investigators mapped everyone who had regular access to the house. The two employees, Hassan and Mohammed, were brought in separately. Their homes were searched. Their bank accounts were examined. Their phones were gone through. Their movements on the night of the robbery were traced hour by hour. Both had consistent, verifiable accounts of where they had been. Clean records. No unexplained cash. No suspicious contacts. They were released without charge. The three friends, the jeweler's social circle, were next. Older men, established, with their own gold businesses and their own sons working in the trade. Their homes were searched. Their families were interviewed. Their own financial records were checked. Nothing. These were men who had built their lives over decades and had no reason to risk any of it. Cleared. Then the investigators turned to the women who came to sell gold at the house. 5 of them, regulars, women from the neighborhood who trusted the jeweler's wife with family pieces when they needed quick cash. This was where the logic of the investigation sharpened. Each of these 5 women had children, and the investigators were not looking at the mothers. They were looking at the sons. The first woman had a son named Marwan. He was in his mid-20s and had a history of trouble, drug use, the wrong company, money problems. His mother claimed he was fine. She said he had no involvement in crime. She said everything about him was normal. She was lying about all of it. But when detectives pulled his full record and cross-checked his whereabouts for the night of the robbery, the evidence placed him elsewhere. Not there. Cleared. The second woman had twin sons, Hassan and Mohsen, both at the end of their 20s. Same process. Searched, interviewed, tracked. Their night was accounted for in detail. Cleared. The third woman's sons were married. Lower risk, but still checked. Cleared. The fourth woman had a son who was in financial trouble, living at home. No job, no clear income. Checked. Parents testified. Home searched. Alibi confirmed through his own social circle. Cleared. The fifth woman had 2 daughters and a son. The son was 26 years old. His name was Taha. When investigators brought the fifth woman in, the pattern repeated. She insisted her son was innocent. She insisted he didn't use drugs. She insisted he had no criminal connections. She was wrong on all of it. But what broke the case open was not Taha himself. It was what Taha knew. His mother had been coming to the jeweler's house for years, selling gold, talking, being welcomed into the home. And Taha had been listening, not carefully, not with a plan, just the way a young man absorbs information without thinking about what it means. Details about the house, the layout, what the jeweler kept in the bedroom, how much cash was typically on hand. The kind of information that sounds like small talk until someone decides it isn't. Taha had a girlfriend, a young woman named Suhila, who had worked as a housekeeper for the jeweler's family until she left to get engaged to a man from her home village. The engagement had been arranged, the wedding date approaching. She no longer worked there, but while she had been there, she and Taha had spoken on the phone regularly, and in those conversations she had shared things, details about the family, the house, what was kept where. She had not thought she was doing anything dangerous. She was talking to someone she trusted, and Taha, in turn, had shared what he heard with someone else. That someone else was a young man called Karbush. Karbush was not a nickname in the affectionate sense. It was what everyone called him, and it stuck. His real family name was Budahir. He was from the neighborhood next to the jewelers, close enough to have grown up in the same streets, far enough to have gone unnoticed in the initial investigation. By the time detectives came looking for him, he was not in Morocco. His parents, when interviewed, said their son had crossed into Spain some months earlier, not legally. He had gone through one of the small Spanish-administered territories on Morocco's northern coast, Ceuta, which sits on the African side of the strait and has served for decades as a crossing point for people without the papers to travel officially. Slipping through Ceuta was not simple, but it was known, and Carbuche had managed it. In Spain, he had ended up with a man his own family called the uncle, a neighbor from their street who had been living in Spain for years. In his late 30s, married with children, the uncle ran a business there, buying and selling, operating in the gray spaces that immigrants without documents sometimes navigate. He was not a violent man. He was not a criminal in the traditional sense, but he had money, and he had a tolerance for things he should not have tolerated. Carbuche had brought someone with him, Akram. Akram was the jeweler's own son. The jeweler had told investigators his son was in Spain, working legitimately, building a life. He believed it. And in the way that fathers sometimes choose to believe things, he was not entirely wrong about the person his son wanted to be. But he was completely wrong about the person his son had become. Akram had left Morocco carrying borrowed papers, not his own passport, someone else's, a young man called Walid, who resembled him enough to pass inspection at the border. Akram's own record had become too complicated to travel under his own name. He'd become deeply involved with drugs, not casually, but seriously. Multiple substances, serious money spent, serious company kept. The kind of life that creates constant financial pressure and constant bad decisions. In Spain, he had met back up with Carbuche. The two of them had been close before Akram left Morocco. Close enough that Carbuche knew things about the jeweler's house that had come through Taha, through Sohila, through the long invisible chain of information that this family had unknowingly been leaking for years. In Spain, both men were living off the uncle. He paid their rent. He gave them cash when they needed it. He thought of himself as helping them get stable. What they were actually doing was watching him, learning his routines, and waiting. One afternoon, while the uncle was out with his family, they went into his apartment and took everything he had, 40,000 euros in cash. That is a sum that represents years of careful, difficult savings for someone working a normal job. For the uncle, it was devastating. And it was gone within days, spent across clubs, substances, and the fast-moving economy of two young men who had no concept of what that money had cost to accumulate. When the uncle came home and found the theft, he knew immediately who had done it. He sent word. He made clear that he would find them. They ran. Running from the uncle, Akram and Carbuche had no money and a serious problem. The uncle was looking for them, and they owed him 40,000 euros they had already burned through. Akram came up with a solution. It was the kind of solution that only makes sense to someone whose judgment has been completely destroyed by years of addiction. He would have his father robbed, the jeweler's house in Morocco, the gold, the cash reserve. Akram knew what was there, had grown up surrounded by it, and understood exactly what it was worth. He had Carbuche's contacts. He had the information that had come through Taha. He had, most critically, access to something that would solve the biggest obstacle: the key. Akram had an extra copy of his father's keys. He had taken them before he left Morocco. 2 keys, one for each lock on the outer gate. He needed people on the ground in Morocco to do the actual job. He reached out through Karbush to 2 young men who worked at the mechanic's garage, owned by a man who would later become a key witness in the trial. These 2 men, skilled with their hands, comfortable with physical work, and badly in need of money, were told they would receive a cut of the haul and the chance to fund their way to Spain afterward. They agreed. Akram gave them the keys. He gave them detailed instructions. Enter quietly. 2 locks, 3 wire cutters on the gate frame, so it opens without forcing or noise. Go directly to the bedroom. Tie the family. Take the gold and the cash. Do not hurt anyone. Lock the gate behind you on the way out. Karbush stayed out of Morocco. He crossed back into Ceuta and waited. Akram stayed with the uncle in Spain, on paper, giving himself distance from the crime. The 2 mechanics carried out the robbery exactly as instructed. When investigators ran out of obvious suspects among the neighborhood women's families, they pulled back and looked at the network of information that had made the robbery possible. The chain led step by step to Taha, then to Karbush, then to the uncle. They went looking for the uncle. He was home when they knocked. He opened the door, looked at the officers, and the color drained from his face. A neighbor had already noticed him moving something out of the house on the night after the robbery, a heavy bag carried in a hurry to his brother's apartment nearby. That information had reached the investigators through a local informant. A search of the brother's apartment, a quiet, overwhelmed man with his own mortgage, his own debts, a civil service salary stretched thin across a family he was doing his best to raise, turned up 2 bags. One contained 22 kilos of hashish. The other contained gold and cash. The gold matched the jeweler's description exactly. Every piece he had cataloged was there. The cash matched the amount he had reported. Not a single item was missing. The brother was arrested alongside his wife, but it became clear quickly that neither of them had known what they were holding. The uncle had handed them a bag and told them it was his belongings. They had stored it without looking inside. The judge, after careful examination of the evidence, determined that the brother and his wife had no knowledge of the contents and ordered their release. The uncle, however, could not explain the gold. He claimed ignorance of the robbery. He claimed ignorance of the bag. The judge found neither claim credible. The 2 young mechanics, traced through their phones and the testimony of associates, were arrested separately. They had kept the wire cutters. Both items were recovered and matched the marks on the gate. Sohila, the former housekeeper, was brought in for questioning. She confirmed that she had spoken with Taha on the phone and that she had shared details about the household without understanding the risk. She was not charged. She was released and was already preparing for her upcoming wedding. Taha confirmed the phone calls, confirmed what he had passed along. He was able to account for his own whereabouts on the night of the robbery through multiple witnesses. He was not in the chain of the robbery itself, only in the chain of information that made it possible. His role, while significant, did not make him criminally liable for the act itself. Cleared of the robbery charge, Karbush was found in Ceuta. He had been waiting there, using Walid's passport to stay in a kind of legal suspension. Not in Spain, not in Morocco, just waiting. He was brought back into Morocco through the same crossing he had used before, without official papers this time. He was arrested immediately. Akram, still in Spain, was unreachable for now. But an international arrest warrant was issued. His passport was flagged. His legal status in Spain was compromised. He was a wanted man with no clean documents and no way to run cleanly. It was only a matter of time. The trial was handled by a judge who took the case seriously. The brother and his wife acquitted, proven to have had no knowledge of what they were storing. The uncle, sentenced to 4 years for receiving stolen goods and 7 years on the hashish charge, to be served consecutively. The 2 mechanics, 30 years each. The court applied the statute that covers armed robbery carried out at night by a group of 3 or more people who restrain the victims inside their own home. In Moroccan law, as in most legal systems, this combination of factors makes the crime among the most serious categories of theft, and the sentence reflects that. 30 years each. Carbouche, 30 years, convicted as the organizer and logistics coordinator of the robbery. Akram, 30 years, handed down in absentia. He was still in Spain when the verdict came. The 2 mechanics, sitting in a cell with 30-year sentences, were not inclined to help him reduce his. He was extradited months later and placed in detention, where he began the process of appealing a conviction that 3 other men had already spent years confirming. The man who had built the walls, the jeweler who had spent decades protecting what he built, got everything back. Every gram of gold, every bill of cash. Nothing was missing. But his hearing never fully recovered, and his son was going to be in prison until he was in his mid-50s. Some walls, it turns out, are not built high enough to keep out the people who already have the key. That is the story of a man who built walls to protect everything he had, and the one person those walls could never stop. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This channel is new, and every single person watching right now is part of building something from the ground up. If you want more stories like this one, cases that never made international headlines but deserve to be heard, subscribe. I have a full list ready, and I am not stopping anytime soon. And before you go, drop a comment. Tell me what worked for you in this video, what did not, what you want more of. I read everything, and this channel grows the way you want it to grow, not the way I assume it should. See you in the next one.